Is the NBA promoting Victor Wembanyama enough? We're going to talk about that. We're also going to look at the business side of Meadowlark Media and see what Dan Le Batard has on his hands. We're also going to play a very important clip from the Bill Simmons podcast. The podcast was published on February 16th, 2024, but it's so important. When I first heard this, it changed the way I thought about how I interact with sports content, and it might apply to you as well. So we'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's talk about Marc Stein. And so Marc Stein is someone whose name comes up every now and then. He covers the NBA. He's covered the NBA for ESPN in the past. And now he's on the NBA subreddit's first page 2 times because he recently recorded a podcast with Pablo Torre. But what I want to focus in on is not the content of the podcast, but Marc Stein's actual presence online. So when I went to look for the podcast, so I wanted to listen to the full podcast, I couldn't immediately find it. And I first searched in YouTube and I just searched for the Stein line, and you don't see anything in the first 4 results. Nothing comes up related to the NBA. Then we get to 2 NBA videos, but these aren't Marc Stein's actual podcast. So then I looked at Apple Podcasts, search, and you see some abandoned shows that he had, but he hasn't posted recently. So finally, I searched in Google and I did come across his Substack. And what's interesting is if you listen to this preview, he talks about the fact that he actually published this podcast specifically for Substack. So I think this is a very interesting angle. He's putting this content behind a paywall, behind his subscription. And I just thought it was an interesting approach by him because everyone else is freely publishing their content. He's chosen to put it behind a paywall. There are a few clips on the NBA subreddit. And when I looked at his Twitter, he's got 1.4 million followers. So he's got a really strong following. And if we scroll down, we can see that his tweets have traction. And looking at this latest tweet, let's see what this latest tweet is. Oh, this one is actually 16 minutes ago. I didn't even know about this one, but I'm referring to this one that was posted 7 hours ago. It's got 111,000 views. And we have a quote from Adam Silver: "There's no contemplation of moving the All-Star game." So I talked about this in the comment section of one of my videos. I didn't think there was any chance that the NBA was going to take away the All-Star game from the Clippers. And my initial thought was just the logistics behind moving the All-Star game. I was just thinking there's no way. But then someone brought up that they could move it to crypto.com arena. And then I thought, well, yeah, that actually is possible. I didn't think about the fact that there are 2 NBA arenas in the same city. But even then, it would be very difficult, but at least it's possible, right? But the other part of this is the All-Star game isn't a Clipper team activity. It's a league activity that the Clippers just so happen to be hosting. So I didn't actually think they were going to move the All-Star game anyway. But this was an interesting quote on a fairly slow news day for the NBA and sports generally. So that actually leads to my the next point I want to get to, which is Bill Simmons' podcast clip. So let's go ahead and play a clip from the February 16th, 2024 podcast. So let me actually find it. Here we have Bill Simmons, and the guest on the show is Derek Thompson. So let's play the clip.
It's microdosing for the NBA. No, so here's what I want to do for sports. I want to describe to you, Bill, my relationship with the NBA, and then I want you to tell me if I'm crazy. So I listen to you and Ryan and the NBA show and Mismatch. I probably listen to hundreds of hours of NBA podcasts every year. Do you know how much basketball I watch before May? Like probably 20 minutes. And like this year at my best friend's bachelor party, we watched the fourth quarter of a Knicks game at our Airbnb in Florida. That's it. So I was doing the math on this, and I was like, my consumption of professional basketball is 100 hours of Ringer podcasts about basketball to every 20 minutes of watching the actual NBA. That's a 300-to-1 ratio of analysis to actual sporting event. And on reflection, I was like, this is kind of psychotic behavior. It's totally counterintuitive. I can't really even explain it to myself. In one interview, I said, it's kind of like the NBA is a piece of audio gossip for me. It's like a reality show that lives in my ears for 6 months that transforms into a live sport every spring. And if this is common, and I get the sense that it is kind of common, that a lot of people have this kind of relationship with sports, I wonder what it means for the economics of sports media from a consumer standpoint.
So what he's describing is largely how I consume sports content. I'm not actually watching the games. I am listening to Bill Simmons and sometimes other media personalities relay their thoughts on the games. So, isn't that a very interesting dynamic where you have the sport? I'm interested in it, even interested in specific games, but I'm not actually watching. I'm listening to hear what other people have to say about the game. So I want to hear what their interpretation is. And the primary person I go to for this is Bill Simmons. So I just think this is a fascinating aspect. And hearing Derek Thompson talk about it, when I heard it, I was like, yes, that is actually what I do. And he listens to much more content than I do. I'm primarily Bill Simmons, but I like when Ryan Russillo would join the show. I like hearing Zach Lowe, Brian Windhorst at time. The more I've heard about from Brian, the more I like hearing from him. But I think this is a very interesting dynamic, and I think it's increasing. And the way I think about it is tracking sports rather than watching them. And it's a weird position for here. We'll just focus in on the NBA. I'm sure it's happening with other sports, but the primary sport that I pay attention to is the NBA, and it's an interesting place that the NBA finds itself in, where it's like, yes, there is interest in our league, but people aren't watching the games nearly as much as we'd want them to. And they're paying attention to these podcasters, and the podcasters are really just relaying their thoughts. And then that's where the NBA reality is coming from, in part, right? Of course, there are many different streams of information and consuming the content that happens. So we have podcasts, we have the YouTube highlights, we have the individual clips that are posted on uh, Twitter and what's I think TikTok, and then of course other platforms going around. But it's such an interesting dynamic to me that you have these games, people are interested in them, but they're not actually watching them. Part of the reason that I don't watch, and I suspect a lot of other people are, is I don't want to invest my time. I don't want to pay attention to that game when it could easily end up being a bad game or just one not worth watching or someone doesn't play or something along those lines. And so what I'll do is track what's happening. If I'm really interested in the game, what I might do is I might go for the fourth quarter of the game or the last part of the game. So I actually did this the other night. I was interested in Drake May and how the Patriots were going to fare against the Buffalo Bills, but there was no way I was going to watch that game. I was going to track it, so I was uh, in the meantime I was doing work on the computer and I was keeping track of the score. So just watching it to see if the Bills pulled away, because if they did, there was no point in me turning on the TV. But if it remained close in the fourth quarter and I thought the Patriots had a chance of winning, then I was going to watch it. And so that's what ended up happening. And I watched the final 8 minutes of it. Usually I'm not interested enough even to turn on the TV, but in that case I was. But the point here is that it's hard to invest that much time into a game unless you really, really care about it. So in the playoffs, yes, I would potentially watch a game. And this leads to my next point, which is Victor Wembanyama. So where I changed everything was Victor Wembanyama's rookie season. I was so interested in what he would be and how he would end up turning out in the league that I watched almost every single Spurs game for Victor's rookie season. And I watched a lot of the games in season two. This is completely abnormal for me. I hadn't been watching any games, but once he came along, I think what was happening was this guy's too interesting for me not to watch. And so I did start to watch him. And what I was surprised by during Victor's rookie season was that he wasn't being promoted a lot, not relative to who he was and what type of spectacle he was and the potential hype. We're talking about a legitimate generational superstar with no hyperbole behind that. And we have games where he's showing up and it's not even sold out. We're seeing empty seats. That is something I found unbelievable. And so at this point, let's just play a clip from Victor. And this is the other day. This is just a clip that came out. The Spurs had an intra-team scrimmage. Let's look at Victor Wembanyama bullying Luke Cornett and then dunking. So he probably couldn't have done this in the past. What he did was he shouldered Luke out of the way. You can tell he's added muscle to his frame, and he's been working all off season. Of course, he had that condition that he had to be shut down last season. Now he's back, and Luke Cornett is a legitimate, solid center, and he just shouldered him out of the way and then dunked the ball. So I think we're going to see him take a level up, a step up this season. But the reason I'm covering Wemby is because the NBA doesn't, I don't think they promote him nearly enough. It makes me think of the WWF and when they would have a guy that had the look and potentially other characteristics where fans could draw, they would have a guy that's a draw for the fans. To me, it's like, how are you not making Wemby the face of everything? I have him on every national televised uh, broadcast that I can have him on. This guy is probably 7'5", and he's got so much skill. He's really intelligent. Like I think that's one of the things that is not paid attention to is just how much of a thinker he is. And I think he's legitimately an intellectual person who is very interested at such a young age. Even if he wasn't 7'5" in the NBA, I think he'd be a very interesting person to pay attention to. But not only does he have that, he's in the NBA. He's 7'5". He's athletic. He wants to be. You can tell he wants to be a guard at times and just shoot threes. He's a very interesting player, and for him not to have take, I fully expected him to take over the league, and instead, what we saw was really not as nearly as much hype as he represents as he should have behind him, and the Spurs tucking him away. And we saw the Spurs tanking his rookie season, which I thought was I would that was so I thought that was extremely bad. I thought that was a very poor response to getting this generational talent was to double down by the Spurs and tank his rookie season and also limit his minutes. Now it turned out his limit it's a good thing that his minutes were limited because we did see him get winded at time, but I think the Spurs were also limiting his minutes really for the most part primarily to tank so that they had less of a chance of winning games. If you'll remember in his rookie season, the Spurs actually started out quite well. I think they were 3-2. They won. They started out decently, and I think the Spurs could have been close to the playoffs, if not made the playoffs in his rookie season, had they not purposefully submarine the season. And we saw this in part with Jeremy Sohan being the starting point guard, and he had no business being the starting point guard. But for some reason, Greg Popovich had to have this experiment. Of course, it worked out horribly because Jeremy Sohan is a power forward. He is not a point guard. But we saw even his teammates not passing the ball to Victor. And so I think this gets lost. But it's very important to remember that the Spurs could have been much more competitive in Victor's rookie season had they wanted to be competitive. But they weren't. And then in his second season, we saw continual problems. Greg Popovich was out as coach. They bring in this new coach who does okay, mediocre. I would describe his performance, and then Victor ends up sitting out most of the second half of the season. But what I was initially thinking with Victor is that he would come along and he would be like a second edition of when Shaquille O'Neal took over the league. So let's go ahead and play some clips from Shaquille O'Neal's rookie year.
Holds the Reed, driving shot, blocked by O'Neal, out of bounds.
O'Neal the rebound, now the Magic with a final shot chance. O'Neal runs the floor, takes it all the way.
Down in Orlando. Last game, Dennis Scott was starting. Bowie was coming off the bench as O'Neal follows and almost and does bring down the entire backcourt.
Now let's see if Houston gets it. There's a hold right there. Houston holds it now.
right. So I've seen that Shaquille O'Neal diving and sliding across the court highlight so many times, but part of the reason why is because Shaquille O'Neal took over the league when he was a rookie. It was a Shaq attack season. He was a sensation. They promoted him as much as possible, even without social media and all of the different ways there are to promote online that exist today. Shaquille O'Neal was very much top of mind. He was on all of the magazines, he was on all of the highlight reels. You could not get enough of Shaquille O'Neal. They were showing him, featuring him in televised games, and the Magic didn't tank, to my knowledge, in his rookie season. I think they did. I think they were a 500 team. But my point is that the NBA really pushed Shaquille O'Neal, and with good reason. He was exciting, and I remember that. I remember this. This was right around when I first started watching the NBA, but I'd probably watched for a few years. But Shaquille O'Neal took over the league, and I expected Victor Wembanyama to do the same with the NBA promoting him. But instead, there was a very much a light promotion, and it was like he really took a set. He was in the second tier when it came to different players that were being promoted. So you still saw Luca and Giannis and LeBron and Steph being more of, I think, and even Jason Tatum to an extent, being more promoted than Victor. But with Victor, going back to the WWF, you have a guy that's 7'5", can do everything, and you're not going to put him as the feature. I would have made him the face of the league. And there's talk about, well, he's not. I've heard talk about the non-Americans getting the attention. I don't even care. As a fan, I don't care if they're American or if they're French or if they're any other nationality. I just want to see whoever is the most interesting, and I think Victor is. And so early on, especially one one transition that I've seen with Victor is when he started out, he really had this Kobe Bryant type of mindset where he came in and he wasn't friendly to opponents, and he was there to destroy them. And I think the Spurs watered that away and took out some of the competitiveness that he had, especially when they weren't passing him the ball. If you don't recall the Spurs not passing him the ball, there's a Chicago Bulls clip, and I think it's Stacey King brings it up during the telecast. Also, on that same telecast, it's not as often replayed, but Sean Elliott on the Spurs side also brought it up that, hey, the Spurs are ignoring Victor Wembanyama. You have to get him the ball. So the very fact that existed tells you that there was a problem on the Spurs side with Greg Popovich, and they were really holding him down. And then the NBA also the same way, just not overly interested in this freak of nature who has everything that you'd want when promoting someone. So I don't think he's promoted enough, but we might see that change in year 3. And of course, a leap is expected. He spent this offseason getting better, and I think he's going to. I mean, the Spurs have to be in the playoffs this year. They have to. They have too much talent not to be in the playoffs. I never liked how they tanked during Victor Wembanyama's rookie season. I think they should have been right away going to be competitive, but it is good to see him back from the condition that he had. And so now we have year 3. So we'll see how the NBA approaches this. But I think they really need to market him because he is fascinating. And I don't think he's been marketed enough. But now let's look at Meadowlark Media. And I have a PowerPoint on this. So we're going to go through a few slides and just talk about what does Dan Le Batard has on his hands. So let's actually view this in the full screen here. Let's go to fit to window and see if this pulls it up correctly. This is lagging somewhat, and I'm not sure why. Let's see. But to start off with what's going on here, Meadowlark Media interested me because you have Pablo Torre, and he's referencing that his podcasts are a Meadowlark Media production, something to that effect. And then after I'd heard it a few times, I was like, okay, well, Pablo Torre is on this path to superstardom. So let's see what they have, what's going on here. Like, is this going to be really a windfall for Dan Le Batard. How is he going to play this? What is Meadowlark Media anyway? And so that's what this PowerPoint is all about. So let's, to start with, I don't really have a background here. I find out about Pablo Torre. I know of Dan Le Batard, but I don't exactly know what Meadowlark Media is. And I'm interested in it because, of course, they're housing this superstar. So I spent about 3.5 hours researching this. I put the over under on my research at 3.5 hours. And this is what I've come up with. So they're lacking structure, organization, and focus. This was just a theme that came up over and over again. And I think the informal nature in which Dan Le Batard operates the company is one source of the problems. And I think organizationally, it's reached its ceiling. But of course, the media properties are very desirable, starting with Pablo and, of course, the attached talent to those media properties. But I do think Meadowlark Media is in danger of losing that talent and those properties. So at the end of this PowerPoint, I get to my advice and my outlook on Meadowlark Media. But first, let's just talk about my background. I don't have much background here. So I think that's very important to know because I don't have the historical context when it comes to the Dan Le Batard show. So before his emergence, what I knew of Dan Le Batard is that he was on ESPN. He had since been independent and he has a sports themed show and he's got these various characters and they're wearing different attire and I don't understand the show. And so I initially published this video just on the Dan Le Batard show. I initially published this and immediately, like literally overnight, I published on Sunday or it was a Saturday, maybe around midnight. And immediately when I woke up the next morning, I had comments telling me that I didn't understand the show, which is 100% true. I don't understand the show. But this really research is just me looking at what I see in front of me. And this could potentially be someone who is looking at the Dan Le Batard show for the first time because they found out about Pablo, right? So they come along, hey, I've looked at Pablo and I see he's connected to Dan Le Batard. I see that he's on the podcast. So what's going on with this show? I see that it's about sports. We have a familiar cast of characters. We have David Sampson. We have Amin El Hassan. What is going on here? And so I think this presentation can be a look at from multiple angles, including just one who is a potential viewer to the Dan Le Batard show. But going back to my background, again, I don't have much of one. So if you're looking for someone who is knowledgeable of the company and has been with Dan since his days at ESPN, that's not the case. And that's in part because the way Dan presents his content is not something that's going to draw me in. If I see a guy wearing an outlandish outfit or he's wearing costumes or this is just a reoccurring theme, I'm not going to take that show seriously. And so I didn't. And so I initially called the show a clown show, and not because I meant that in any type of derogatory manner, but just because that's my lasting impression from when I was a casual viewer coming across various clips from Dan Le Batard, and I would see him in various attire. So when I say that, let's just go back to this first slide of the presentation. We have Dan wearing a cowboy outfit, and he's got a cowboy hat. Not that this necessarily has to be outlandish, but when you couple this with the other costumes that are frequently a part of the show, then you have this just the attention grabbing attempt, I think, here, right? I think this is in part to draw people in to see what is going on with the show. Why are people wearing such outfits? But going back to the slide, because you have Pablo emerging on the scene, going mainstream, becoming popular, having this meteoric rise, which was a result of 7 months of intense research, I wanted to take a closer look at the media company behind it all. And so we're going to continue looking at that. This is the research that follows. So looking at the company's LinkedIn page, we have this summary. Meadowlark Media is a content studio and creator network founded in 2021 by John Skipper and Dan Le Batard. Through partnerships with industry-leading storytellers, Meadowlark develops premium content across all formats for third-party buyers with an initial focus on sports. And then we have this front office sports article. And I follow with this excerpt because here we have the co-founder, John Skipper, leaving. His departure is notable because he is the former ESPN president. So remember, he co-founded this company with Dan Le Batard. And then when they first started, they immediately were met with success because they signed a 3-year contract worth $51 million with DraftKings. And then it continues. It was not immediately clear what the new leadership structure would be for Meadowlark's business. One source said that Meadowlark will be aiming to focus more on its podcasts, including the Dan Le Batard Show with Stu Gatz and Pablo Torre Finds Out. There will be less of an emphasis on documentary content, although it will not totally go away. So here, actually, this last paragraph gets into something that I zeroed in on was, okay, you have documentaries, you have podcasts. What's it going to be? What are you doing? Where is the ROI here? And then also looking at the second to last one sentence paragraph, it was not immediately clear what the new leadership structure will be. And I think this is something that Meadowlark Media is trying to address, is just we need something, we need a direction. We need someone to tell us, hey, what exactly are we doing? What is this company? What are we going to become more than or beyond just a collection of podcasts and some individual documentaries? So here I have an update. This is from May 30th, 2025. We have DraftKings upping their deal with Meadowlark Media. It doesn't say the dollar amount this time. And reading from speculation online, people are thinking that's because that the dollar amount it was actually down, right? So they got 3 years, 51, and people think that it's likely that this went under on this second deal with DraftKings. And then we'll get to some imagery in a second. So this entire PowerPoint isn't just a bunch of text, but I do have some text up front because this is helping us establish really the foundation for where we go from here. So we have an article from Barrett Media. I've got 2 snippets, and the reason why is because Dan has a lot of quotes in this article. One is, he was the business guy for us, referring to John Skipper. He handled the business stuff that I didn't have a lot of familiarity with. And then here at the bottom, we have, at the moment, I'm gathering information on all of the things we need. And that's a response to whether Meadowlark would be on the lookout for a new CEO. Dan continues, we have a strong executive team and more than 40 employees. We have an assortment of people who have been carrying the load in his dilution, not his absence. So they're stating that John Skipper's not completely gone. He's just not around as much. But he continues, he's still doing the sporting class for us. He's still a board member, and he's still someone who's going to be helping us in places where his skill set demands it. And then another section from the article is Le Batard providing freedom for all at Meadowlark Media. And I watched an interview with Dan from the All the Smoke podcast. And he talks about this more, is that he wants people to be free under his label. And I think this is an admirable outlook. I think this is a genuinely, like, I think Dan is very much a genuine person. And I think this is I think he's very friendly to creators and anybody who wants to join up with him. I think this is good for them, but bad for the company. So here it reads, freedom to create is a philosophy that Le Batard lives by, and by regarding the other creators under the Meadowlark Media umbrella. He describes each individual creator as their own business, free to create and partner with whom they choose. Earlier this year, Barrett Media reported that John Stu Gatz Weiner would be stepping back from his role on the Dan Le Batard Show after 20 years working alongside Dan. And then we have a quote, Stu Gatz wants to concentrate on doing God Bless Football 5 days a week because it's his and he owns it. After 20 years partnering with someone, he wishes to also partner but do some solo stuff. I totally understand that, totally support it, and I'm excited to see what he makes of that. So here I think we have a really big problem for Meadowlark Media, the company. Again, great for the talent that is coming through Meadowlark Media. In fact, when I find out more about Dan, it's like, yes, if I was a talent and I was going to work at Meadowlark Media, I would really appreciate this approach because I have total flexibility and total freedom. The problem is that when you have people coming and going and ebbing and flowing, it really undermines what you have in terms of your podcast and your company. So looking back at the first paragraph, each individual creator has their own business, free to create and partner with whom they choose. If I'm giving someone the upside of partnering with me, Dan having such a reputation in this space, uh, I'm not just going to let them have all of the upside everywhere. They get all of the upside and the stability of working for Meadowlark Media, potentially being on the Dan Le Batard podcast, but then they also have the freedom to leave. So that's problematic if you're the podcast and or Meadowlark Media, because then you just have really uncertainty everywhere. And you also don't have any structure. And then other people are going to see what these different talents are doing, and then they might start to mimic that. So here we have Stu Gatz, who is actually in the label with the Dan Le Batard show. I think it's Dan Le Batard show with Stu Gatz, right? So you have this guy who is not the headliner, but I forget what to call it. But anyway, he's the name under the headliner, and now he's stepping back from his role. Okay, well, what exactly does that mean when you say stepping back? Like we need to know we need to know definitively, what does stepping back mean? Are you there or are you not? So the way I'm looking at this is you have to either be in or out. Either you're with us or you're not. And if there is the potential that there's you're part time with the podcast and you're part time on your own, okay, fine. But we need to know exactly what those boundaries are so that it doesn't create any confusion, and it also doesn't create any instability. So Dan, going back to this quote, Stu Gatz wants to concentrate on doing God Bless Football because it's his and he owns it. So after 20 years of partnering with someone, he wishes to also partner but do some solo stuff. I totally understand that, totally support it, and I'm excited to see what makes of it. So one of the impressions I got from Dan is that he is so anti-corporate and was so turned off by how ESPN operated during his time with ESPN that now he is completely open and wants everybody to thrive and just be free to do whatever they want. But if you're trying to have your own company and grow it and grow beyond its current status and get those bigger DraftKings deals, then it's going to be really hard when you have talent who is undermining it at the same time. So on this next slide, we have really something that illustrates this perfectly. And here we have Stu Gatz, the longtime partner with Dan, and he is on the NFL on NBC podcast with Kris Sims. And here we have the quote, "I'll show up to that show," referring to Dan's show, "whenever the fuck I feel like showing up to that show." How does that sound? So immediately as I hear this, like if I hear this, Stu Gatz is never, ever showing up on the podcast again. It's over. You can't come back from this. If this is how you feel, especially if this is how you feel publicly and what you're saying, then we just can't work together anyway. But it has to end before this, because as I'm about to play this clip, as you'll find out in the clip, for some time, Stu Gatz has been showing up just as he feels and with no reliability. So it's not even known for Dan Le Batard, the Dan Le Batard show. It's not even known if Stu Gatz is going to be there or he isn't. So you can't have a podcast, you can't have a company where this is the case. And I'm trying to actually right now, I'm just going through the various clips here. I don't know if I have this set up. Let's see here. Let's actually just search for. I remember the actual name of it. Let's see, Kris Sims, and we're going to play the clip. 5 headliners. All right. So I think we have. No. Let's see. We'll get to this in a second. No, I'm not finding it right away. So, rookie. Oh, yeah, there it is. Rookie. I think it's rookie. Yes, here we go. Here we go. I found the podcast now. And we will get to this clip. Here we go.
Oh, yeah, baby. NBC Sports Now, free 24/7 streaming channel. All the good stuff's there. Starts at 7 a.m. with me and Florio on PFT Live. We hand it off to Dan Patrick Show. He flips it to Dan Le Batard Show with Stu Gatz. People are pissed. Stu Gatz needs to show up more on that show. Then we got Fantasy Football Hour with Matthew Berry. And then, last but not least, the greatest show of them all, Kris Sims Unbuttoned. Also with Stu Gatz, and he actually shows up at this show. So good to have you. What's up, dude?
Wait, so my listeners are mad at me for not showing up to my show and hosting this show with you?
Yes.
So they're mad at me.
That's what we're getting from the comments, through NBC. You know, it's we publicize Le Batard with Stu Gatz every day. Right. And the people want Stu Gatz, and you are not there sometimes. So, they feel like it's like false advertising, like you're trying to pull the old okey doke on them there.
The problem is when I'm there, we don't talk football. When I hang out with you, we always talk football. You know, I love talking football. I've also, listen, fortunately for me, Sims, and hopefully you'll get to this place, okay? I have arrived at a place in my career after 20 years with Le Batard where I'll show up to that show whenever the I feel like showing up to that show. How does that sound? Okay?
That's amazing. That's amazing. Only in this business can you do that. I just show up when I want. But you can get away with it. That's fine. I can't believe he lets you get away with it.
I can't either. And so, and to my knowledge, at the time of this recording, Stu Gatz is still a part of the show. And I don't see how that's the case. You cannot let someone do this. This is so problematic. And here you even see people are talking about this. People are saying, hey, you know, this guy, I'm expecting this guy to be on the show. He's not on the show. What's going on? You have Kris Sims representing NBC talking about like, hey, this is an actual problem. People are complaining in the comments because we're promoting the show. We're saying you're going to be on it, and then you don't show up. So this is a real problem. And then you have Stu Gatz positioning this as some type of, you know, milestone he's reached in his career where he can get to the point where he just doesn't show up to a show. That's not a place you want to be. If you don't want to show up somewhere, then you need to end that relationship anyway. So this is not a desirable outcome. And this isn't something you would ever see from Pablo Torre or David Sampson. But here you have Stu Gatz taking on this position, and clearly the partnership is past. It's at this point, it's done. It's so far over. But now he's here openly talking, really in a somewhat indirect way. He's talking bad about the show. So let's play a few more seconds.
Right, but I guess that's the relationship you have. You're not going to get away with that here, okay? Because if you do that crap with me, and then I see you in person, I'm definitely putting you in a headlock. All right, so just so
okay.
You know.
Well, listen, I'm not going to do that to you because you're giving me the thing that I want. You're giving me football. I want to talk football, and so we never do on our show. I also host when I'm not doing this show and when I'm not doing the Le Batard show. I host Stupidity, and I also host a show, God Bless Football. Kris Sims has been a weekly part of that show for 4 years now, and so I'm happy to be doing this with him. Sims, I have to talk to you about the.
So then we have a transition away here. I found this clip extremely telling, and I had not come across this before, but this gets back to the point I was making, is that when you are so informal, it can come back to get you, right? Like everything sounds good in theory that we're going to have more of an informal business relationship. You can come and go. Everything's on friendly terms. But now we're seeing an abuse of that with Stu Gatz. So I think this is just extremely, extremely problematic. And what I think emphasizes the point is that unless I'm wrong here, unless I've missed something, Stu Gatz is still a part of that show. And I don't see how that could still be the case. And by the way, this isn't an old podcast. This was recorded or published on August 11th, 2025. So we'll continue on. I found the podcast from the Meadowlark Media website homepage. So just going from there and looking at their different properties. And when I say properties, everything is actually fairly simple. It divides into two to two stacks. We have column A with the podcasts, and we have column B with the documentaries. And so when it comes to podcasts, you have the flagship podcast, which is the Dan Le Batard Show with Stu Gatz. Then you have Pablo Torre Finds Out, and you have Nothing Personal with David Sampson. And actually, Pablo Torre and David Sampson are bigger than Dan Le Batard at this point in terms of views. Now, obviously, Dan has a legendary status when it comes to his show, but that's more legacy than it is now. The now is Pablo Torre has emerged and David Sampson isn't too far behind. But when we look at these documentaries, we have the comeback. So we have a Boston Red Sox documentary, the Good Rivals, and then we have Friday Night Heists and many more documentaries. So what I'm going to do if I'm trying to improve this company and take it to the next level, I'm going to improve the focus. And we saw in the Barrett Media article, or was it another snippet? Either way, there was a snippet where it said that there'd be less of a focus on the documentaries, but they weren't going away altogether. That already tells me the answer, that the documentaries need to be cut. But if they don't, like if there's a tie to the documentaries, then I'm going to ask, okay, what's the ROI here? Is it anywhere close to the podcast? If it's not, then they need to go. If they are worth continuing, then we need to either have a separate company or a separate division where things are kept organized. Because right now it's unclear, and this wouldn't be clear anyway. But as far like what I can't tell what's the priority here. And so if I'm looking at this company, we need to have focus. Where are we going to go? Where do we stand to gain the most? What is yielding the most ROI for us currently? And it's probably going to be column A. And I'm going to look to pick up the Dan Le Batard Show. I'm going to eliminate Stu Gatz, and I'm going to look to elevate the flagship show. And then I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Pablo Torre and David Sampson are successful, because I think those two are your key winners. But there's actually, towards the end of this presentation, we'll get to a surprise winner in a moment. All right. And so one thing I noted with the Le Batard Show is there's so many people milling around, and we see the camera panning to so many different personalities. So here we've got 4 different panels showing a total of 5 people. One guy's in a nightgown and a nightcap. And so this is a part of the show, one that I'm unaware of because, again, I don't have the historical context. But as a new viewer, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, why is this guy in a nightcap? And also, you just can't keep track of all of these people unless you are ingrained with the show. So I think one part of this presentation comes down to like, look, if Dan wants to stay where he's at with his own show and just continue as is, then obviously continue as is. But you've reached this level and you're at this level. And if you want to go beyond this and really grow to a major player in the podcast space, and you want your flagship podcast to be even bigger, then you're going to have to evolve and change. And so I think one of the ways is just increasing the focus within the podcast itself. That might alienate some of the audience that has been loyal and likes the current layout of the show. But another question would be, does the current layout of the show, does the current presentation align with what people are looking for when they are consuming content? All right, so just looking at some views here, I have a snapshot of Pablo Torre's most recent videos. We can see that the Clippers videos are putting up solid 6 figures, over 200K. Here we can see 3 that are at 218,000, 302,000, 314,000. And those are bringing in new viewers to his other shows, which are all comfortably above 5 figures, and some getting, we could see one at 56,000, another at 39,000. That's a quick happy birthday to Pablo. But the point here is that Pablo is very much on fire. And so we want to continue this momentum and pour as much as possible into him. Also, someone I think is very sharp, and I really like how he presents. You can tell he's constantly hustling. You can tell he's constantly thinking. This guy, the word that keeps coming to my mind is sharp. And this is in reference to David Sampson. So we see here, he's also got some he's got some good views on his videos. And I think this is in part because we saw Pablo's success, but David was on Pablo's shows, on those podcasts about the Clippers, and people are going to pay attention to him. They're going to see him covering this story. Of course, many people haven't covered this story. David is one of them that is talking about what's going on with these podcasts. Not only is he sharp, but he's also got the background. So he's comes from the Florida Marlins. I can't remember what his exact position was, but he was an executive at some level. Was he? I don't think he was the GM. I can't remember what he was doing with the Marlins, but obviously a very talented guy, very knowledgeable, experienced, sharp. He works hard. You can tell he works hard. So I think there's a lot of potential with the David Sampson podcast. So again, this is a very desirable media property. Here we have what is this? Football in America. It's some football show. I can't remember. Oh, it is Football in America, I think. Yeah, so I think that's the name of the podcast. Here we don't see nearly the same amount of interest. So we do have the most recent video with 4.6 thousand views, which is solid, right? Rock solid. That's what something we'd be looking for. But we also see other videos with 139 views, 695 views, 809, 138, 287. So I'm going to look at this podcast and we're going to decide, is there room to grow here? I think this is fairly new. I think this started in 2025, but is this going to get the traction or is it not? Because if it's not, then we need to drop the podcast. And then similarly here, what we have is the former Oddball podcast, and this is with Amin El Hassan and Israel. I can't remember his last name, but we have Amin and Israel, and their podcast is doing fairly well, right? We see several mid four figures, low four figures views for some of the podcasts, which were all about the NBA. And then we see what is an abrupt transition to this new podcast, which is, I think, called DLS Hoops. And it's not nearly as possible. I don't know what's going on with it. But here we have a lot of WNBA players in the thumbnails. So I don't know why Amin dropped his podcast. But this is, and by the way, when you look at the Meadowlark Media homepage, it actually links to Oddball and not the new podcast, because it looks like Oddball has just been removed from YouTube. The channel has been removed from YouTube. So I don't know. It's unclear to me what's happening here, but we also need to look at, hey, is this new podcast going to happen? It's still very relatively new. Here we see high three figures for the views. But again, if I'm looking at the company and deciding how do I grow this, I'm going to look at the podcast and we're just going to look at the numbers because they tell the story. Do people care or do they not? But I'm also going to be mindful of, hey, is this new? Does this have potential? What do we actually have here? Is it engaging to people? Are the people watching it actually sticking around and watching the video? All things I'm going to be looking at. But let's go ahead and continue on. We've got another podcast, and this comes in the form of a DraftKings playlist. It is called Good Follow. This one, I think, is going to go. The most recent episodes are from a year ago, and here we're looking at mostly low three-figure views. We've got 1.2 thousand view, but it looks like this one's been abandoned, and we just can't have any abandoned podcasts. It's either got to be active or it's not. Again, if I'm looking at Meadowlark Media, I'm thinking, hey, we have the potential to have a real media company here, something with a large podcast portfolio or maybe a narrow podcast portfolio. But I'm going to take this very, very seriously. And if we're doing this, we can't have these shows that are just out there floating and there's nothing really active with them, but at the same time, they're a part of our portfolio. And so with Good Follow, this is going to be dropped. And then here we actually have, what is this? This is Stu Gotts. So here we have Stu Gotts. We've got football and we've got baseball and we've got views that are up and down. So as low as what I'm seeing here is 759 views from a video posted 2 days ago when I had this when I got this screenshot. And then we have a video as high as 13,000 views. So either way, I think Stu Gotts, he's settled in where he's at, right? Like this guy's been at it for a long, long time. Whoever's interested in him is going to be interested in him. He's likely not going to get too much bigger, but either way, even if he did, Stu Gotts is gone. After that comment, he's gone. We can't have somebody that's either, coming and going whenever he pleases. So Stu Gatz is definitely we're going to sever ties with him. And then we have South Beach Sessions, and this is a long form podcast where you can see here all of the episodes are just over an hour long, and it's just not pulling in views. So 729, 789, 717, 1.1 thousand, 794, 3.3 thousand, 2,000. This is just something where again I'm going to drop it because it's just I don't think it's garnering the interest. But then again, looking at it, to be fair, this is just the last 7 episodes, and one was from just a month ago. So maybe this is a slow build. But to me, again, I'm going to focus in on what do people care about the most, and is this ever going to be something that is actually big, that actually has a chance, right? That's what I'm looking for with a lot of this is, does this have a chance to really take hold? And right now, this is just really like a side project. So we have South Beach Sessions, and this is with Dan interviewing various people on these long form podcasts. And so, of course, here the goal is money, and money is going to come down to views and duration. So not only are they looking at the video, but then they have to stay and actually watch it. So that's where it's going to come from, because then that's going to give us the ability to sell ads, to sell our own products or others. So how do we reach this goal? Well, we need to produce shows that are garnering attention. So again, I'm going to look at the current views because that is the best indicator of anything, but I'm also going to give consideration to how long the show's been, because shows are going to take some time to develop. It's not going to happen overnight, right? We're going to need to see if we're going to need to give the show a chance. So also with everything I've stated, we want to make sure that the show has a chance. And some of these shows are fairly new, so we want to make sure they have a chance. But we also want to look at it honestly and assess whether they actually have a chance of becoming successful. And so what ends up making people watch podcasts, right? Well, it comes down to a combination of things. It can be the personality, it can be the insight, research, opinions, the shock value, right? We saw the guy in the nightgown. Maybe that just brings in people and they want to watch. It can be a combination thereof, something different, but we need to have something, whatever it is. We need to have something that's bringing in the people and making them stay and watch. This is a duplicate slide. But then moving on to the next slide, here I have who I think are the people that I would focus in on. So we have Amin El Hassan, and watching him with Pablo, watching him interact with David Sampson, I really like just how he complements them so well. So in this view, I see him as a really good role player and someone that can really make the stars look even better and just play off them. With Dan, I see a legend, but I see him in his post prime. And then with Pablo, I see him as the franchise player for Meadowlark Media. And to me, he's someone I want to try to keep as if it is all possible, I want to try to keep Pablo on board. And then David Sampson, also an all-star with even more upside. David is someone who I've got my eye on because I really think he is extremely talented. So this is how I am looking at the current cast. And then beyond this, we're going to need to assess who else we're going to keep. So, ending with my advice here, I have you definitely need to hire a CEO, because we need to first have structure, and then we need to organize within that structure. And the CEO is going to bring this. Obviously, we are going to end the Stu Gatz relationship. We can't have something where it's bad for everyone all around. It makes Stu Gatz look worse. It makes the podcast look worse. It means other people are watching this and they're seeing what's happening. They're seeing him talk bad about the podcast. They're seeing him the way he's treating it. The viewers are watching this. The people that have been loyal are watching this. It's becoming a side story. We just can't have this going on. And so this, as the CEO, I think what has to happen is you go up to Dan, because this is Dan's show. This is Dan's company. He co-founded it. Right now, he's the one left, right? John Skipper has left. So you have to ask Dan, hey, what do you want here? Like, how can we do this? And then so whatever Dan decides he wants, and then I would have Dan become the talent, because he doesn't really want to run. He doesn't want to run the company. That's the distinct impression I get, especially because he looks to John Skipper for the business side. So I asked Dan, hey, what do you want? What are you going to allow us to do here? Because the informal way in which this is being run is not working. Like, we've reached our ceiling organizationally. Yes, Pablo is a star and David is a star, but if we're going to keep them, then we need to actually run this company the right way. So for Dan's show, I would keep the best 1 to 2 free range possibilities as, or the best free range personalities as in on the rotation. So uh, when we need them, we can call upon them. Maybe they're a part of the show, but we need to. I think if Dan wants to grow his show, and that's the big question, if he wants to, then we need to decide how are we going to do this and what do we want to make it look like going forward. So if it's the same show, that's fine, but just understand that we're going to get the same results we have been for years. And then I'm going to up the equity stake for Pablo and David Sampson. We've got to retain them, and they're very sharp guys, right? They're very intelligent. They're well aware of what their worth is and what they're becoming, and so they're going to recognize this. And I don't want to lose them. Meadowlark Media can build upon them and really become something special. So you definitely don't want to lose them. And then I have Amin El Hassan. I really like him. I think he just plays well with the other main characters. So I bring him on as a feature complement. I'm going to assess the documentaries. My initial impression is that they are not going to remain because they're just not going to have the same ROI. If they are, I'm going to silo them within the company, or I'm going to create a separate company for the documentaries. And then we're going to cut the non-performing podcasts for multiple reasons. One is that they're going to bring down the brand with them, right? Like, if you have lagging podcasts, then it's going to bring down the brand. We don't want them. We don't need them. We don't want to divert energy to them. And because of that, we are going to end them and focus in on what is going to yield us the most return. And so one last note here is that as I was finishing this presentation, I looked at lebatardaf.com. And so the AF stands for And Friends. And that is the website linked from the Dan Le Batard show. And I didn't come across this podcast originally or initially because I was looking at the Meadowlark Media website. But when I looked at lebatardaf.com, I come across Mystery Crate. I hadn't seen Mystery Crate. I hadn't seen it promoted otherwise. So I looked at the podcast. Here we can see a screenshot of episode 347. It's got 7.6 thousand views. This was 8 days ago. I continued to look at Mystery Crate, and it's consistently pulling in 7,000 views. So there's something here. And by the way, the people in the 4 quadrants of the video are from the cast of characters on the show. So maybe there is something here, and maybe they have their own show where that's where their focus goes to, because this is now a real show that people actually care about. Clearly they care about it, right? And so that's what I'm looking for, is the numbers. Where are the numbers? Where are people going? Where are they? Where is the focus? And if there's focus there, if there's life there, then I want to focus in on that. So imagine if we put more focus on this show and we cut some of the non-performing shows and we start to invest here. Where can we get the views for these episodes? So Mystery Crate, another property with real potential, but we need to put our energy into this and everything else that's performing. All right. So outlook here. The pieces are in place to create a strong media empire. I really do think so. I really think, I mean, obviously with Pablo, right, you have something there. But I think even beyond Pablo, if we look at him as a cornerstone, there are other very attractive properties and talent that we can use to build a legitimately strong media company. So I have here, Meadowlark Media has incredible upside as a category leader, and that category, by the way, being investigative journalism, because it's just not being done. Meadowlark Media can immediately make gains by cutting what doesn't work and consolidating remaining assets and properties. So I think the theme takeaway here when I was looking at the company is, hey, let's have structure, let's organize within that structure, and let's also focus. We need to focus. And if we focus, then I think you're going to see Meadowlark Media become a real player in the sports media space.